Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're tackling social entrepreneurship and how these businesses really make a difference.
Yeah, we've got some great material to dig into.
We do. There's a super interesting 2024 article from the Journal of Management Studies called, let me get this right, Outcome-Based Typology of Social Enterprises.
Catchy.
Right. And it's all about how these businesses actually create change in the world.
And it's not just some theoretical framework. They actually analyzed 49 different social enterprises.
Wow, 49.
Yeah, and across 10 countries. Austria, Canada, even India, and the USA.
Okay, so a real global perspective then.
Definitely. It's a fascinating snapshot of what's working in social impact worldwide.
So what surprised you most about this research?
Well, you know how everyone talks about social impact, but it often feels kind of vague?
Yeah, for sure.
This research actually breaks down social impact into 3 distinct flavors.
3 flavors. Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's a good way to think about it. So you've got individual transformation, providing capital, and then influencing society as a whole.
So it's not just about what a company does, but how they create change, the actual mechanisms they use.
Exactly.
I like that. Give me an example.
Okay, imagine a social enterprise, something like a mentorship program for teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Okay, I'm with you.
On the surface, they're providing guidance, advice, that kind of thing.
Right.
But the impact goes way deeper than that. These programs often end up changing the mentors just as much as the mentees.
Interesting. So it's about changing perspectives on both sides, challenging assumptions.
Exactly. We're talking about these high-powered professionals suddenly gaining a whole new understanding of the challenges these kids face. Maybe even recognizing their own privilege in a new way.
That's powerful stuff. That's individual transformation in action.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is how these individual shifts can ripple outward, impacting families and even whole communities.
Okay, that's one flavor. What about the second one? Providing capital, he said.
Right. And this one's all about resources.
Yeah.
And it's not just about money, although that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It can also be things like access to education, healthcare, job training, even technology. Anything that helps people improve their lives and communities.
Makes sense. Sometimes people just need those essential resources to get a foothold.
Absolutely. And you know what? This was actually the most common type of social enterprise they found in the study.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, and they had a really cool example too. A company bringing solar power to remote parts of India.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Isn't it? And they weren't just lighting up individual homes either. They were installing solar street lights, which makes entire communities safer, especially for women and children.
And probably boosts local economies too. People can work later, be more productive.
Yeah, exactly. Small changes, big impact.
Okay, so we've got individual transformation, we've got providing capital, but sometimes you need to aim even bigger, right? Like shake up the system itself.
Exactly. And that's where the third flavor comes in. Societal influence. This is about creating those large-scale systemic changes.
Big leagues.
Yeah. We're talking about shifting norms, sparking movements, even changing laws.
So these are the social entrepreneurs who are thinking long term. They're not just trying to win a battle. They want to win the war on inequality, injustice, all of that.
Exactly. They understand that real lasting change requires more than just individual actions or even access to resources. You need to shift the very structures that perpetuate those problems in the first place.
So give me an example. What does that look like in the real world? So give me an example. What does that look like in the real world?
Well, one that really jumped out from the research was this European news platform. And they focus specifically on the experiences of working women.
Interesting.
Yeah, but they're not just reporting on issues. They're actively pushing for policy changes that could create a more equitable workplace.
Okay, so they're using their platform to advocate for real change, not just raise awareness.
Exactly. It's about wielding their influence to try to make a real difference in these women's lives.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to society and saying, look, this is the reality for a lot of women. We can do better.
Exactly. And you know what's really cool? This research found that social enterprises don't just operate in one of these flavors. Like it's not just one or the other.
Oh, so there's more nuance to it.
Way more. They actually identified 7 different types of social enterprise, and most of them blend these flavors together.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about these hybrid social impact models.
All right, let's start with what they call the institutional SE. These are the ones going after those big systemic issues, but they do it with a 2-pronged approach.
2-pronged?
Yeah, so they're focused on both changing the rules of the game, like literally changing laws and policies.
Makes sense.
But At the same time, they're giving people the tools and resources to thrive under those new rules.
So it's not enough to just change the law. You have to empower people to actually benefit from that change.
You got it. They're thinking about the individual and the system.
Give me an example. What does that look like in practice?
Sure. One example from the study was a company working to bring clean water to communities.
Okay. Basic human right. Super important.
Exactly. But here's where they get interesting. They didn't stop at just providing the wells. They also worked with governments to make sure that those water sources stayed protected and accessible for everyone long term.
That's smart, because what's the point of having a well if it gets contaminated or if people can't access it?
Exactly. They were playing the long game. They recognized that to create lasting change, they had to influence policy, not just provide a one-time solution.
Okay, that's the institutional SE. What's another one of these hybrid models?
All right, let's talk about the enabling SE. These social enterprises are all about combining resources, that capital we were talking about, but pairing it with personalized support to create more lasting change.
Okay, so it's like giving someone the ingredients and teaching them how to cook a nutritious meal, right? Instead of just handing them a sandwich.
That's a great analogy. It's about empowerment, not just a handout. And one of the classic examples, which the research actually highlights, is the street paper model.
Oh, yeah, like those newspapers that people sell on the street. I see those everywhere now.
Exactly, and they're becoming more and more common. Basically, they provide homeless individuals with employment, a way to earn an income and start reintegrating into society.
Right, giving people a hand up, not a handout.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, it goes way beyond just handing them a stack of papers and saying, good luck.
There's more to it.
Oh yeah. The study found that a lot of these street paper organizations go the extra mile. They connect people with universities for job training, help them navigate legal issues, even organize cultural outings like museum visits.
Wow, that's amazing. They're really trying to address those underlying issues that keep people trapped in poverty, not just the immediate need for income.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about breaking down those barriers and changing perceptions.
But even with that kind of holistic approach, I imagine there are still huge challenges.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest hurdles is overcoming those deeply ingrained social stigmas.
Right, you can't just erase centuries of prejudice overnight.
Exactly. And the researchers found that enabling SEs often find themselves battling not just the problem itself, but also the stereotypes surrounding the people they're trying to help.
Yeah, that makes sense. People have preconceived notions, and it's hard to change those.
One founder they interviewed actually called out the hypocrisy of greenwashing, arguing that consumers are being made fun of by companies making vague sustainability claims while ignoring the very real struggles of marginalized communities.
It's like people want to feel good about buying a product, but they don't want to actually confront the systemic issues behind it.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's a good reminder that even with a two-pronged approach, providing resources and personalized support, these social enterprises still come up against those deep systemic barriers. And if enabling SEs face an uphill battle, I can only imagine what it's like for those on the front lines of social change,
Oh, yeah.
the ones who are really trying to shift those deeply ingrained beliefs and prejudices. And that brings us to our next hybrid model, the emancipatory SE, right?
You got it. These are like the freedom fighters of the social enterprise world. They're the ones tackling those really entrenched social issues head on, often by giving a voice to the voiceless.
So not just speaking for marginalized communities, but actually creating a platform for them to speak for themselves. That's got to be incredibly powerful.
It really is. And one of the examples from the study that really stuck with me was this company working to raise awareness about sex trafficking.
Oh, wow. That's a tough issue.
It is. And they're doing some really important work. Basically, they're giving survivors a platform to share their stories, but on their own terms, And it also allows them to connect with others who understand what they've gone through.
Yeah, that shared experience, that sense of community can be so important for healing and growth.
Absolutely. And it highlights how that blend of individual transformation and societal influence can be so powerful, especially when you're tackling deeply held beliefs and prejudices. But, even with the best intentions, these emancipatory SEs face this constant dilemma.
What's that?
It's this question of where to focus their resources, because they're always working with limited resources,
Uh-huh.
right? So it's like, do they prioritize direct aid and support services, which are obviously crucial in the short term, or do they invest more in those longer-term systemic changes that might not have a tangible impact for years, maybe even decades?
It's that classic tension between immediate needs and long-term solutions. You need both, but it's hard to do both well, especially when you're dealing with limited resources.
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act for sure.
It is. And speaking of going above and beyond, we haven't even touched on the encompassing SE yet. Those are the ones who are basically doing it all, right? All three dimensions of impact at once.
Yeah, they're like the social impact triathletes. They're going for gold on all fronts.
I love it. So give me an example. What would that look like in practice?
Okay, so let's say you've got an organization that's fighting food waste.
Okay, big issue. Lots of different angles there.
Exactly. So they might have an app that helps you reduce waste at home, track your groceries, get recipes for leftovers, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But then they might also run educational programs in schools, teaching kids about where their food comes from and why it's important to reduce waste.
Okay, getting them young. I like it.
And then, on top of all that, they might be lobbying governments to change food labeling laws or create incentives for businesses to reduce waste.
Wow, so they're covering all their bases. Individual, behavior change, education, and systemic change.
Exactly.
But that's got to be a lot to manage. Is there a risk that they might spread themselves too thin? Like, are they really making a meaningful impact on any one of those areas if they're trying to do everything at once?
It's a valid concern. And the researchers did point out that this jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none dilemma can be a real challenge for encompassing SEs. They might be checking all the boxes, but are they truly moving the needle on those big systemic issues?
Right. It's that classic question of depth versus breadth.
Exactly.
Well, regardless of which approach they take, one thing is clear. Social enterprises are out there, and they're finding some seriously creative ways to make a difference in the world.
No doubt. And I think this research gives us a really useful framework for understanding the nuances of their work. It's not just about what they do, but how they approach the challenge. And I think that's something worth thinking about, even in our own lives, right?
Absolutely. So as we resurface from this deep dive into the world of social entrepreneurship, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What do you hope they remember long after this episode?
I think the next time you come across a social enterprise that grabs your attention, don't just ask yourself, what do they do? Ask yourself, how do they do it?
I like that.
And then, maybe even more importantly, ask yourself, how can I be a part of the change?
Beautifully said. There's a flavor of social impact out there for everyone, right?
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to cook up your own recipe for change. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Keep those brain cells firing, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.